Let me tell you about the day that changed everything we thought we knew about humans. My name is Vex Kromwell, and I used to be the head of security at the Galactic Council's most prestigious interspecies zoo. Notice I said used to be. There's a reason for that, and it involves one very clever human who made me look like a complete idiot. The Nexus Prime Zoo was the crown jewel of our civilization. We had creatures from 17 different star systems, all safely contained in what we called the most advanced security facility in the known galaxy. For 300 cycles, not a single containment breach. Not one. I was proud of that record, maybe a little too proud. The zoo showcased the galaxy's most fascinating species. We had the crystalline hunters of Vega 7, the phase-shifting predators from the Outer Rim, and the telepathic swarm mines of Kepler Station. Each exhibit was a masterpiece of containment technology that designed to keep dangerous creatures safely separated from our paying customers while allowing optimal viewing experiences. Then the Galactic Council decided to add a human exhibit. Humans, the newest species to stumble into our galactic community, barely past their nuclear age and still convinced they were the center of the universe. The Council thought they'd make a fascinating addition to our collection. A primitive species that had somehow managed interstellar travel through what could only be described as spectacular luck and stubborn determination. The human specimen they brought us was named Jake Morrison. Average height for his species, brown hair, unremarkable features. He looked exactly like every other human we'd cataloged, which is to say boring. The intake report described him as a maintenance worker from some backwater colony ship. Nothing special, nothing dangerous, just another example of humanity's mediocre evolutionary development. I remember thinking this would be the easiest exhibit to manage. Humans had no natural weapons, no telepathic abilities, no exotic biology. They were just bipedal mammals with opposable thumbs and an inflated sense of their own importance. The containment field barely needed to be active. We could have kept him in with a strongly worded sign. Jake's habitat was designed to replicate a standard human living space. Comfortable furniture, entertainment systems, food dispensers, even a small library of human literature. The Council wanted visitors to see humans in their natural environment, which apparently involved a lot of sitting around and staring at screens. For the first few weeks, Jake lived up to every boring expectation. He slept 8 hours a day, ate his meals at regular intervals, and spent most of his time reading or exercising. Visitors would come by, watch him for a few minutes, make some condescending comments about primitive behavior, and move on to more exciting exhibits. I should have paid more attention to what he was reading. The zoo's security system was my pride and joy. Quantum encryption, biometric locks, redundant containment fields, and monitoring systems that could track a molecule's movement across the facility. Every exhibit had multiple backup systems, each one capable of maintaining containment independently. The central control room looked like something from a military command center, because in many ways it was. Jake Morrison seemed completely unaware of any of this. He appeared content in his little habitat, blissfully ignorant of the technological marvels surrounding him. Just another primitive human, grateful for the comfortable accommodations and regular meals. I was so wrong about everything. The human exhibit quickly became one of our most popular attractions, though not for reasons you might expect. Visitors came primarily to feel superior about their own evolutionary achievements. Watching a human perform basic tasks like reading or eating apparently provided tremendous validation for species that had mastered interstellar travel millennia ago. Ambassador Quillex was our most frequent visitor. This pompous bird-like creature from the diplomatic corps would arrive weekly with different delegations, using Jake as a living example of primitive sentience. Quillex stood nearly 8 feet tall, with iridescent feathers and a voice that could shatter glass when he got excited, which was often. Observe the crude way it processes information, Quillex would announce to his entourage, gesturing at Jake with one of his forearms. Notice how it must physically manipulate objects to understand them. No telepathic interface, no quantum processing capabilities. Truly remarkable that such a limited species achieved space travel at all. Jake would look up from whatever book he was reading, nod politely at the visitors, and return to his activity. The aliens interpreted this as typical primitive behavior. I thought it showed admirable patience, considering Quolex's voice could wake the dead across 3-star systems. Dr. Blunderbeak was another regular visitor, though for different reasons. The self-proclaimed expert on primitive cognition saw Jake as the perfect research subject. Blunderbeak resembled a cross between a squid and a computer terminal, with tentacles that constantly shifted colors to indicate his emotional state. He'd spend hours taking notes on Jake's behavioral patterns, completely convinced he was witnessing groundbreaking insights into early intelligence development. "Fascinating," Blunderbeak would mutter, tentacles flashing bright orange with excitement. The subject appears to be creating mental maps of its environment. Primitive spatial awareness, but surprisingly systematic for such a basic nervous system. Jake had been methodically exploring every corner of his habitat since day one, running his hands along walls, examining the feeding systems, and testing the response times of various automated features. Blunderbeak interpreted this as simple curiosity. I filed it under standard containment behavior. We were both catastrophically wrong. Then there was Zara Fizzpop, a young alien from a species that resembled enthusiastic purple mushrooms. Unlike the condescending adults, Zara seemed genuinely fascinated by Jake's activities. She'd press her face against the viewing barrier and watch him for hours, asking endless questions that usually went unanswered. "Why does he move his eyes back and forth when looking at those paper things?" Zara would ask anyone within hearing range. "And why does he touch the walls so much? Is he looking for something?" Smart kid. Wish I'd listened to her questions more carefully. The betting pool started during Jake's second week. Various species would wager on his daily activities, intelligence assessments, and behavioral predictions. The odds heavily favored him being completely oblivious to his surroundings, with most aliens betting he'd never even noticed the containment systems. I should have been paying attention to the fact that Jake never lost track of feeding times, never seemed surprised by automated functions, and had somehow figured out the exact schedule for every maintenance cycle in his habitat. Instead, I was too busy enjoying my reputation as the security chief who'd never had a containment breach. The warning signs were everywhere. Jake's exercise routine took him to every corner of his habitat in a precise pattern that, in retrospect, gave him sight lines to every major system junction. His reading material included technical manuals that previous human exhibits had ignored completely. And he had this habit of testing the response time of various systems by deliberately triggering minor automated functions. But the biggest warning sign was how calm he remained during our weekly security drills. Every other creature in the zoo showed stress responses when containment systems cycled through their test sequences. Jake just kept reading, as if the sudden activation of emergency barriers and defensive systems was perfectly normal. Maybe for him it was. The other exhibits housed genuinely dangerous creatures. The Andromedan phase hunters could walk through solid matter and had acid for blood. The crystalline swarm from Vega 7 could cut through steel with their wing edges. The Shadow Collective from the Dead Zone existed partially outside normal space-time and required exotic matter containment fields just to remain visible. Jake Morrison read books and did push-ups. Guess which one I should have been watching more carefully? It was a perfectly ordinary day when everything went sideways. I was reviewing the weekly security reports, feeling particularly smug about our unbroken safety record, when the first alarm sounded. Then the second alarm. Then every alarm in the facility started screaming at once. The main display board lit up like a festival celebration, except instead of pretty colors, each light represented a different catastrophic system failure. Containment breach in Section 7. Power fluctuation in Section 12. Environmental controls offline in Section 4. It was like watching a perfectly orchestrated disaster unfold in real time. What in the name of the 17 moons is happening? I shouted at my control room staff, who were frantically trying to make sense of the cascade failure. "Sir, we're showing simultaneous malfunctions across 14 different systems," reported Glimbix, my deputy security chief. His 3 eyes were spinning in different directions, a sure sign of panic. "Backup systems are engaging, but we're getting conflicting data streams from the primary sensors." The security feeds showed absolute chaos throughout the zoo. In Section 7, the Andromedan phase hunters had somehow bypassed their exotic matter containment and were phasing through walls, sending visitors screaming in every direction. The crystalline swarm was carving geometric patterns in the air of Section 12, their wing beats creating harmonic frequencies that shattered viewing barriers. Most terrifying of all, the Shadow Collective had begun expanding beyond their containment area, their partially corporeal forms seeping through the facility like living darkness. Visitors who got too close simply vanished, presumably transported to whatever dimension the shadows called home. Emergency protocols kicked in automatically. Glass doors sealed sections of the zoo, separating visitors from the most dangerous creatures. Evacuation alarms guided panicking aliens toward emergency exits. Security drones deployed to establish containment perimeters around the escaped creatures. And through all of this chaos, one exhibit remained perfectly secure. The human habitat showed no signs of system failure. Every sensor read normal. Every containment field operated at full efficiency. Jake Morrison sat calmly in his reading chair, apparently oblivious to the pandemonium erupting around him. He'd occasionally glance up when a particularly loud crash echoed through the facility, but otherwise seemed completely uninterested in the fact that his zoo was falling apart. "At least we don't have to worry about the human," Glimbix muttered, tentacles quivering with stress. "Imagine if that primitive creature got loose during all this." I nodded absently, too focused on coordinating our disaster response to appreciate the irony of that statement. 23 different containment breaches, exotic predators loose throughout the facility, and we were relieved that our most harmless exhibit was secure. The facility's AI began running diagnostic sequences, trying to identify the source of the system-wide failures. Quantum processors that could analyze a star's composition from light years away worked frantically to understand how so many independent systems could malfunction simultaneously. "Sir, the preliminary analysis is confusing," reported Lieutenant Busnick, our chief technical officer. His metallic carapace was sparking with nervous energy. "The malfunctions appear random, but they're happening in a sequence that maximizes chaos while minimizing actual danger to visitors." That should have been our first clue that something was very wrong. The escaped creatures were causing panic but hadn't actually hurt anyone yet. The system failures were dramatic but not life-threatening. It was almost like someone had carefully planned the whole thing to create maximum distraction with minimum casualties. But we were too busy dealing with the immediate crisis to think strategically. Shadow collective entities don't contain themselves, and Andromedan phase hunters have a tendency to phase into solid objects if you don't reestablish their containment quickly. Jake Morrison turned a page in his book and continued reading. I should have wondered what could be so interesting that it held his attention during a facility-wide emergency. I should have questioned why every system in the zoo was failing except his habitat controls. I should have realized that the timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Instead, I spent the next 4 hours coordinating the recapture of 17 different species while trying to figure out how our foolproof security had failed so spectacularly. The human just kept reading. After we'd managed to recontain most of the escaped creatures and restore basic facility functions, I finally had time to figure out what had gone wrong. The preliminary damage assessment showed system failures across 47 different subsystems, each one critical to zoo operations. It was the kind of comprehensive breakdown that should have been impossible. Our investigation team worked around the clock, pulling diagnostic data from every system in the facility. The quantum computers processed terabytes of information, looking for patterns, correlations, anything that could explain how so many independent systems had failed simultaneously. The answer, when it came, was both simple and terrifying. "Sir, you need to see this," Lieutenant Busnick called from his analysis station. His metallic surface was flickering with confused color patterns. The system failures weren't random. They were sequential, following a very specific pattern. The main display showed a three-dimensional map of the zoo, with each system failure marked in red. At first glance, it looked like chaos, but when Busnick adjusted the timeline, a pattern emerged. The failures had radiated outward from specific points, following the zoo's network infrastructure, in a way that suggested intimate knowledge of our security protocols. "Someone mapped our entire system," I said, staring at the display in growing horror. They knew exactly which systems to target, and in what order to create maximum disruption without triggering our quantum lockdown protocols. But that was impossible. Our security network was protected by encryption that would take a galactic-class civilization centuries to break. The physical systems were isolated behind multiple firewalls. Even if someone had access to our facility schematics, they'd need quantum-level computing power and detailed knowledge of 17 different alien technologies. Run a trace on all external network access, I ordered. Check every communication channel, every data probe, anything that could have given someone access to our systems. The results came back clean. No unauthorized network access, no data breaches, no external interference of any kind. Whatever had caused our security failure had come from inside the facility. That's when I decided to review the security recordings. I started with the obvious suspects. The Andromedan phase hunters had technologies we didn't fully understand. The Shadow Collective existed partially outside normal space-time, which could theoretically give them access to our quantum encryption. Even the crystalline swarm had demonstrated unexpected technological integration capabilities. But every recording showed the same thing. Each creature had been going about their normal activities when their containment systems simply failed. They were as surprised by their sudden freedom as we were. Then I checked the human exhibit recordings. Jake Morrison had been in his habitat for 43 days. 43 days of what everyone assumed was boring, primitive behavior. Sleeping, eating, reading, exercising. Nothing that suggested intelligence beyond basic tool use and pattern recognition. Except now I was watching the recordings with the knowledge that someone had systematically mapped our entire security network. Jake's daily exercise routine wasn't random. He moved through his habitat in precise patterns that gave him sight lines to every system junction, every network node, every piece of equipment visible from his enclosure. His reading material included technical manuals that contained detailed specifications for the same technologies that had failed during the crisis. Most damning of all, his seemingly casual interactions with his habitat's automated systems had been tests. He'd been deliberately triggering responses to measure timing, identify protocols, and map the decision trees that govern facility operations. Glimbix, get me a complete analysis of everything the human has done since arrival, I ordered, my voice probably shaking more than I cared to admit. The analysis took 6 hours and painted a picture that made my scales turn cold. Jake Morrison hadn't been randomly exploring his habitat. He'd been conducting the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation in galactic history, using nothing but observation and systematic testing. He'd figured out our quantum encryption by analyzing the timing patterns of automated responses. He'd mapped our network topology by triggering cascading system interactions. He'd even identified the physical location of our primary servers by correlating environmental variations with equipment heat signatures. The maintenance worker from a backwater colony ship had reverse-engineered our entire security system using techniques so primitive we hadn't thought to defend against them. And we'd been congratulating ourselves on keeping him safely contained while he planned the most audacious prison break in galactic history. The truth hit me like a collision with a neutron star when I accessed the deep storage security files. Jake Morrison wasn't just any human, and this wasn't just any containment breach. The recordings from the day of the incident told a story that turned everything we thought we knew about humans completely upside down. I'd been looking at the crisis all wrong. The escaped creatures, the system failures, the facility-wide panic. It hadn't been an accident or a random breakdown. It had been a military precision operation designed to accomplish one very specific goal. The deep scan recordings showed what had really happened during those chaotic 4 hours. While we'd been frantically chasing Andromedan phase hunters and trying to recontain Shadow Collective entities, Jake Morrison had been conducting the most sophisticated rescue operation in galactic history. The system failures hadn't been random. They'd been carefully timed to create blind spots in our surveillance network. Windows of opportunity lasting exactly long enough for Jake to access sections of the zoo that no one was supposed to know existed. Because our prestigious interspecies zoo had a secret, Section Omega, buried deep beneath the main facility, housed what the Galactic Council euphemistically called special research subjects. These weren't dangerous predators or exotic wildlife specimens. They were sentient beings, captured from primitive civilizations and held for scientific study without their consent. Jake had somehow discovered Section Omega's existence and spent 43 days planning their liberation. The recordings showed him using maintenance shafts that weren't supposed to be accessible from his habitat. His exercise routine had included testing the structural integrity of ventilation systems and service corridors. The technical manuals he'd been reading contained detailed schematics of the facility's sublevels, while we'd been distracted by escaped creatures on the upper levels. Jake had systematically freed 17 different species from illegal captivity. Beings who'd been taken from their homes and families, studied like laboratory specimens, their existence denied by official records. The most brilliant part was how he'd used our own security protocols against us. The chaos on the main levels had triggered automatic lockdowns that sealed Section Omega from outside interference. By the time we'd re-established control of the upper facility, Jake had completed his rescue operation and vanished along with every creature from the hidden levels. "Sir," Lieutenant Busnick said quietly, his color patterns dim with what might have been shame. "Preliminary scans indicate Section Omega is completely empty. All research subjects are gone, along with their containment systems and most of the experimental equipment." The recordings showed Jake's escape route. He'd used the facility's own emergency evacuation systems to transport the rescued beings to safety, disguising their departure as authorized personnel evacuations during the crisis. The maintenance tunnels, service elevators, and emergency exits he'd mapped during his captivity became an invisible highway for dozens of creatures fleeing to freedom. But the most shocking revelation was yet to come. Jake Morrison wasn't a maintenance worker from a backwater colony ship. According to the classified files I finally accessed, he was a human intelligence operative who'd volunteered for capture specifically to infiltrate our facility. Humanity's government had known about Section Omega. They'd known about the Galactic Council's illegal research programs. And they'd sent one of their best agents to gather evidence and liberate the victims, knowing he might never make it home. The species we'd dismissed as primitive and harmless had planned and executed an operation that made our best military strategists look like children playing with toys. They'd identified our security weaknesses, exploited our assumptions about their capabilities, and achieved objectives we hadn't thought possible. Ambassador Quillex's condescending lectures about human cognitive limitations suddenly seemed laughably naive. Dr. Blunderbeak's analysis of primitive behavioral patterns had completely missed the sophisticated intelligence gathering happening right under his tentacles. Even young Zara Fizpop had shown more awareness of Jake's true nature than any of the supposed experts. The final security recording showed Jake's last moments in the facility. Standing in the main evacuation tunnel, surrounded by the creatures he'd freed, he looked directly into one of our hidden cameras and smiled. Not the vacant expression of a primitive captive, but the satisfied grin of someone who'd just pulled off the most audacious rescue mission in galactic history. Then he triggered the facility's final protocol, an electromagnetic pulse that wiped our security systems clean and ensured no evidence of his methods would survive. Jake Morrison had beaten us using nothing but observation, intelligence, and that's runs. The kind of strategic thinking that comes from a species that had fought its way up from a gravity well, while most galactic civilizations had been handed interstellar travel by their predecessors. We'd been so busy feeling superior that we'd missed the most dangerous predator in our entire facility. The fallout from what the media dubbed the Morrison Incident was swift and devastating. Within 72 hours of Jake's escape, news of Section Omega's existence had spread throughout the galaxy. The Galactic Council faced the largest political scandal in their 3,000-year history, and I found myself at the center of a crisis that would reshape interspecies relations for generations to come. The evidence Jake had gathered during his captivity was comprehensive and damning. Detailed recordings of illegal experiments, documentation of sentient beings held without consent, proof of cover-ups at the highest levels of galactic government. He'd somehow transmitted everything to human intelligence services before triggering his escape, ensuring the truth couldn't be suppressed or denied. Ambassador Quillex was the first casualty. The pompous bird-like diplomat who'd spent weeks lecturing visitors about human primitive intelligence found himself facing charges for crimes against sentience. His diplomatic immunity was revoked when recordings surfaced of him personally authorizing the capture of beings from pre-spaceflight civilizations. Dr. Blunderbeak's research career ended overnight when his behavioral studies were revealed to be unethical experimentation on unwilling subjects. The tentacled scientist who'd been so fascinated by primitive cognition discovered that his own understanding of intelligence was laughably primitive compared to the human he'd been studying. The Galactic Council's response was predictably bureaucratic. Emergency sessions, investigative committees, promises of reform, and accountability. But the damage was already done. Trust in galactic institutions had been shattered by the revelation that the galaxy's most respected organization had been running illegal prison camps disguised as research facilities. Meanwhile, humanity's stock in galactic politics rose meteorically. The species that most civilizations had dismissed as barely evolved mammals had demonstrated strategic capabilities that made established powers fundamentally reconsider their assumptions about intelligence and civilization. Earth's ambassador to the Galactic Council, a woman named Director Harrison, addressed the emergency session with words that still give me chills. The Morrison operation represents humanity's official position on the treatment of pre-spaceflight civilizations, she announced to the stunned assembly. We will not tolerate the exploitation of developing species, regardless of their technological level or political status. Any civilization that engages in such practices will be considered hostile to human interests. The threat was clear. Humanity might be newcomers to the galactic community, but they'd proven capable of military operations that made our best security look like amateur theater. Several council members actually resigned their positions rather than face potential human retaliation for their involvement in Section Omega. The zoo itself was shut down permanently. The creatures from the main exhibits were relocated to legitimate preservation facilities, while the facility was converted into a memorial for the beings who'd been held in Section Omega. Young Zara Fizzpop, the enthusiastic purple mushroom who'd been the only one to recognize Jake's intelligence, was appointed as the memorial's first director. As for me, well, my career in security ended the day Jake Morrison walked out of our facility with 17 species worth of rescued prisoners. The being who'd spent 3 centuries maintaining a perfect safety record had been completely outmaneuvered by a human using nothing but observation and deductive reasoning. But here's the thing that really gets to me. In all the investigations, hearings, and political fallout that followed, one detail kept nagging at my mind. Jake Morrison had been in captivity for 43 days. 43 days of systematically gathering intelligence, planning a rescue operation, and preparing for an escape that would change galactic politics forever. During those 43 days, I'd walked past his exhibit hundreds of times. I'd watched him raid, exercise, and go about his daily routine. I'd even felt sorry for him sometimes, imagining how boring it must be for such a primitive creature to be confined in a small habitat. He'd been planning the downfall of our entire system, and I'd thought he was taking a nap. The final irony came 6 months later, when the Galactic Council officially classified humanity as a Class 7 civilization, the highest possible rating for technological and strategic capability. The species we'd kept in a zoo exhibit was now considered one of the most advanced civilizations in the galaxy. I received a message from Jake Morrison himself, transmitted through official diplomatic channels. It was brief and professional, but it included one line that I'll never forget. Thank you for the comfortable accommodations and the excellent library. The technical manuals were particularly helpful. The man had thanked me for providing him with the tools to destroy everything I'd built my career around. And somehow, despite everything that had happened, I found myself almost impressed by his politeness. These days, I work as a security consultant, helping facilities upgrade their containment protocols to defend against human-level intelligence gathering techniques. It's steady work, because apparently everyone in the galaxy has suddenly become very interested in making sure they never underestimate a primitive species again. And every time someone asks me about the Morrison incident, I tell them the same thing. Never, ever assume that a quiet, unassuming creature sitting in a corner reading a book is harmless. Because sometimes, that creature is gathering intelligence for the most sophisticated military operation you've never seen coming. Humanity taught us that the most dangerous predator in the galaxy isn't the one with the biggest teeth or the most advanced technology. It's the one that can think 3 moves ahead while everyone else is still trying to figure out the rules of the game. Jake Morrison played us all, and we never even realized the game had started.